What if I told you that the most powerful thing you've said all week was nothing at all? Think about it. You speak around 16,000 words every single day. That's nearly 6 million words a year. And here's the uncomfortable question. How many of those words does anyone actually remember? How many changed anything? How many made someone lean in and think, I need to hear more from this person? The answer, for most of us, is terrifyingly close to zero. We live in an age where everyone is talking, texting, emailing, posting, commenting, voice messaging. We have more ways to communicate than any generation in human history. And yet, people feel less heard than ever before. This book, The Smart Word, The Art of Influence Through Strategic Brevity, completely rewired how I think about communication. It argues something radical. The vast majority of words you speak are invisible. They pass through conversations like water through a sieve, leaving nothing behind. But here's the promise I'm making you right now. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why your brain is wired to ignore excessive speech. You'll learn why silence creates social power that words cannot match. And you'll walk away with specific techniques that will make every single word you speak land with impact. Ready? Let's dive in. The book opens with a moment that captures everything. Neil Armstrong standing on the moon. He speaks 11 words. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. 11 words. Not a speech. Not an explanation. Just 11 carefully chosen words that have echoed through 6 decades of human memory. Now compare that to the 120 emails the average professional sends and receives every day. The 67 text messages teenagers fire off daily. We're drowning in words. Our own and everyone else's. And here's what blew my mind. Research from Harvard Business School shows that people who speak the most in meetings are not perceived as the most competent or influential. In fact, there's an inverse correlation. Those who contribute moderately and strategically are rated as more intelligent and more leadership capable than those who dominate discussions. Let that sink in. Talking more is literally making you seem less smart. So why does this happen? Why does the brain tune out when someone talks too much? The book explains something called listening fatigue, and the neuroscience behind it is fascinating. In 2020, researchers at UC San Francisco used brain imaging to track what happens when we listen to speakers of varying verbosity. Here's what they found. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for sustained attention and comprehension, shows significantly reduced activity after just 4 minutes of continuous speech. 4 minutes. That's it. After that, your listener's brain is essentially checking out. But here's the breakthrough. When speakers incorporated strategic pauses and brevity, listener brain activity remained elevated for periods up to 3 times longer. Think of attention like a battery. Every word you speak drains that battery. Every unnecessary detail, every redundant explanation, every filler phrase consumes finite neural resources. When you ramble, you're not demonstrating thoroughness. You're exhausting the very machinery your listener needs to understand you. There's another phenomenon called the cocktail party effect. Your brain has this remarkable ability to focus on a single voice in a noisy room. But it works both ways. Just as we can zoom in on relevant speech, we automatically filter out irrelevant speech. When someone talks too much, they trigger this filtering mechanism. Their voice becomes background noise. Their words become sonic wallpaper. And there's more. Listener attention doesn't decline gradually. It drops off in phases. The first significant drop occurs around 90 seconds of continuous speech. A second drop happens around 3 minutes. After approximately 6 minutes of uninterrupted talking, most listeners retain less than 20% of what was said. These aren't arbitrary numbers. They reflect fundamental rhythms of human cognition. Now here's something that seems counterintuitive but is absolutely crucial. Saying more typically communicates less. Psychologists call this information dilution. When you add unnecessary details, you don't enhance understanding. You fragment it. The listener's brain must sort through more data to find what matters, using cognitive resources that should be devoted to comprehension. Let me give you an example straight from the book. Version A. So, the thing is, I've been thinking about this for a while now, and after considering various factors and talking to different people and looking at the data from multiple angles, I've come to the conclusion that, all things considered, we should probably, if everyone agrees and it makes sense given our current situation and resources, move forward with the project. Version B. I've analyzed this thoroughly. We should move forward. Both convey the same core message. But version B accomplishes something version A cannot. It conveys confidence. It demonstrates clear thinking. It respects the listener's time. And neurologically, it allows immediate encoding without filtering through noise. Research from Princeton confirms this. Speakers who conveyed information concisely were rated as significantly more competent and trustworthy than verbose speakers, even when the actual content quality was identical. Your brain doesn't reward quantity. It rewards signal-to-noise ratio. So we know that excessive speech exhausts listeners. But why do we do it? Why can't we stop ourselves from over-explaining? This is where the book gets into psychology that hit me personally. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Excessive speech is rarely about having too much to say. It's almost always about emotional regulation. People talk to manage their own anxiety, not to convey information. Think about it. When you feel the urge to over-explain, what's really happening? There's usually an underlying sensation. A vague anxiety. A fear that you haven't been understood. A worry that silence will be misinterpreted. These feelings drive the verbal engine. More words feel like more safety. Explanation feels like insurance against rejection or misunderstanding. But it's an illusion. Adding words doesn't add security. It adds vulnerability. Every additional sentence is another opportunity for your message to be diluted, misunderstood, or tuned out. There's also something researchers call verbal control illusion. We mistakenly believe that more explanation yields more control over how our message is received. Studies show speakers consistently underestimate listener comprehension when messages are brief and consistently overestimate comprehension when messages are lengthy. We think lengthy explanations make us clearer. The opposite is actually true. And then there's social anxiety. Research shows that approximately 68% of people who self-identify as over-talkers also report significant social anxiety symptoms. Here's why. Social anxiety creates hypervigilance about how others perceive us. Silence feels dangerous, an empty space that others might fill with negative judgments. So we fill it ourselves, preemptively, with words that feel like protection but function as noise. The anxious mind interprets silence as ambiguity, and ambiguity as threat. Talking becomes a defense mechanism. If I'm speaking, I'm controlling the narrative. But paradoxically, this defense undermines the very connection it's trying to protect. Now let's talk about the science of silence itself. Because silence isn't just the absence of words. It's a powerful form of communication. In 2018, researchers at the University of Groningen conducted an experiment that should transform how you think about speech. They recorded speakers delivering identical messages with one variable, the length and frequency of pauses. Listeners then rated speakers on intelligence, confidence, credibility, and leadership potential. The results were unambiguous. Speakers who incorporated strategic pauses were rated 25 to 40% higher across every dimension. Here's what happens neurologically when you pause. First, the pause creates contrast. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine that pays attention to change. In continuous speech, words blend together. But a pause disrupts the pattern, automatically recruiting attention. Second, the pause creates anticipation. Your brain constantly tries to predict what comes next. When you pause, you leave that prediction temporarily unfulfilled, generating heightened alertness that ensures your next words receive amplified attention. Third, and most importantly, the pause creates space for processing. Continuous speech depletes cognitive resources. Pauses allow those resources to regenerate. They give the listener's brain time to encode what's been said before new information arrives. Here's what I found most striking. People who pause appear confident because pausing requires confidence. Filling silence is easy. Sitting in silence, maintaining composure, allowing your words to land, that requires inner security. Listeners recognize this, consciously or not. The book identifies 3 types of strategic pause, and understanding these changed how I communicate. The emphasis pause is a brief 1 to 2 second pause immediately before or after a key point. This pause tells the listener, pay attention, what I'm about to say matters. The processing pause is moderate, 2 to 4 seconds, allowing complex information to sink in. This pause respects listener cognition, acknowledging that some ideas need time to be understood. The contemplation pause is longer, 4 seconds or more, signaling deep thought. Used sparingly, this can dramatically increase perception of wisdom and deliberation. It says, I'm not rushing to respond. I'm thinking carefully. The book describes a story about Barack Obama that illustrates this perfectly. Political analysts noted that Obama spoke an average of 20% fewer words per minute than his contemporaries, yet consistently rated higher on communication effectiveness. By speaking more slowly and incorporating significant pauses, Obama allowed listeners' brains to keep pace with his message. He created space for comprehension and emotional response. His pauses weren't empty. They were loaded with anticipation, allowing his words to land with amplified impact. Now let's talk about the attention economy, because this concept completely reframed how I think about speaking. In economics, inflation occurs when there's too much currency chasing too few goods. Each unit of currency becomes worth less. The same principle applies to communication. When we're surrounded by endless words, each individual word necessarily carries less weight. We've created linguistic inflation. The average person encounters between 6,000 and 10,000 advertisements per day. They receive hundreds of messages across various platforms. In this environment, speaking more is simply adding to the noise. Speaking less, speaking strategically, cuts through. Here's the mindset shift. Think of your words as currency. Every time you speak, you're spending. Every unnecessary statement depletes your balance. Every filler phrase reduces your credibility account. Strategic communicators are verbal misers. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand the economy of attention. They save their currency for moments when it matters. They invest their words in high-return opportunities. The result, when they finally do speak, people listen. Their words carry weight because they haven't been devalued by endless expenditure. Now let's get practical. How do you actually filter your speech in the moment? The book presents something called the triple filter rule, inspired by a story about Socrates. Before allowing someone to share gossip, Socrates stopped them with 3 questions. Is it true? Is it good? Is it useful? Here's the modern application. Every time you feel the impulse to speak, run your words through 3 filters. Filter 1. Is it necessary? Not somewhat related or potentially interesting. Necessary means, if I don't say this, will something important be lost? If the honest answer is no, stay silent. Filter 2. Is it useful? Does this information enable the listener to do something, understand something, or feel something that benefits them? Your information might be necessary, but are you presenting it in the form most useful to the listener? Filter 3. Is it appropriate? Is this the right time, place, and manner to deliver this information? Something might be both necessary and useful but wrong for this moment. If any answer is no, remain silent. The book suggests creating a physical trigger. A small gesture that becomes your filtering habit. Some people touch their thumb to their forefinger. Others take a breath. In that second or two, ask internally, necessary? Useful? Appropriate? Here's a technique that great communicators share, though few can articulate it. They end before you expect them to. They make their point and then they stop. No trailing summary. No verbal bow tying. No cushion of qualifications. Just the point, delivered, finished. This creates a particular kind of impact. The listener's mind, expecting more words, suddenly finds open space. That space gets filled not by your additional commentary, but by the listener's own processing, their own connection to your message, their own conclusions. Why do we overcomplete our thoughts? The primary driver is insecurity. The fear that we haven't been understood. So we keep talking, restating our point in different words, adding examples, essentially saying, "Did you get that? How about now?" But this creates the very problem it tries to solve. The more you explain, the more you signal uncertainty. The more you repeat, the more you suggest your first version wasn't clear. Compare these 2 statements. We need to change our approach. The current system is too slow, too expensive, and too complicated. We need something faster, cheaper, and simpler. Our competitors have already made this transition and they're gaining market share because of it. If we don't act now, we're going to find ourselves in serious trouble. Now the current approach isn't working. We change, or we fall behind. The second version is dramatically shorter, but it feels more complete, more confident, more compelling. Because it trusts the listener. It assumes intelligence. It delivers the essential insight and then respects the listener enough to let them draw conclusions without hand-holding. Now let's apply this to relationships, because here's something that might shake everything you believe about connection. The couples who last the longest aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who've mastered the art of comfortable silence. A 2023 study tracked over 2,400 couples across 15 years. Couples with the highest relationship satisfaction weren't those who communicated constantly. They were couples who had developed what researchers call eloquent silence zones. Moments where two people can exist together without the pressure to fill every second with words. Why does this work? Because silence in the presence of another person requires trust. It requires the confidence that you don't need to perform, explain, or entertain. When someone can be quiet with you, truly quiet without awkwardness or anxiety, they're telling you something profound. Your presence is enough. The book describes a couple, Maria and James, married 12 years, on the verge of divorce. Their complaint? We can't communicate. But their therapist discovered they communicated constantly. Texts throughout the day, lengthy discussions every evening, weekend-long relationship talks that left them exhausted. The problem wasn't lack of communication. It was suffocation by communication. Every feeling had to be processed immediately. Every thought shared. Every conflict required extensive discussion. Their therapist prescribed a communication diet. For 30 days, relationship discussions were limited to one 15-minute window per day. Outside that window, they simply existed together. Cooking, watching shows, taking walks, no processing. The first week was torture. Both felt anxious, disconnected. But by week 3, something shifted. They started noticing each other differently. Without constant verbal noise, they picked up on nonverbal cues they'd been missing for years. A touch on the shoulder. A particular smile. By the end of the month, they felt closer than they had in a decade. Not because they'd talked through their issues. Because they'd finally stopped talking long enough to actually see each other. Here's another powerful application: listening without solving. Someone you love shares a problem, and you immediately start solving it. You offer advice. You suggest solutions. You explain what they should do differently. And you've just communicated something devastating. Your feelings are less important than fixing this. When someone truly listens to us, without judgment, without advice, without agenda, something magical happens. We feel seen. We feel valued. And often, simply by being heard, we find our own solutions. But genuine listening requires something most people find unbearable: not talking. Not filling silence with your own thoughts. Not demonstrating your intelligence through verbal contribution. Just presence. Try this experiment. The next time someone shares something difficult, resist every urge to respond with words. Maintain eye contact. Nod occasionally. Let your face reflect empathy. When they finish speaking, wait 3 full breaths before saying anything. In that silence, you're communicating something words could never say. What you're feeling matters more to me than what I have to say. Now let's talk about something that trips people up constantly: setting boundaries. We're told to communicate clearly, express our needs, have difficult conversations. And while that's not wrong, it often leads to exhausting verbal battles where boundaries become negotiations rather than statements. The most respected people set boundaries with minimal explanation. They don't justify. They don't apologize. They don't elaborate. "I'm not available for that" is a complete sentence. "That doesn't work for me" requires no follow-up. No needs no explanation. The more you explain a boundary, the more you signal that it's negotiable. Every reason you provide becomes a potential point of argument. Compare: "I can't come to the party because I've had a really exhausting week and I just need some time to recharge, and I know I said I'd come but I really think if I push myself I won't be good company anyway, and I hope you understand." Versus: "I won't be able to make it. I hope it's wonderful." The first response invites debate. The second establishes respect for yourself and the other person's time. Now let's move into the professional arena, because here's a truth that will reshape everything you believe about power in organizations. The executives who speak the least often wield the greatest influence. The book describes a CEO in Seoul, South Korea, who sat through a 90-minute strategic review without uttering a single word. His team presented projections, analyses, proposals. He listened. He nodded occasionally. He took no notes. When presentations concluded, the room fell silent. 30 seconds passed. Then a full minute. Finally, he spoke 7 words: "The Thailand facility. Double the investment timeline." That was it. The meeting ended. Within 48 hours, a $340 million capital allocation had been restructured around those 7 words. Research from the Neuro Leadership Institute explains why this works. When leaders speak frequently, their words trigger habituation response. The brain literally stops treating their communication as significant. But when a leader speaks rarely, each utterance activates novelty salience. The brain's attention networks fire intensely because the communication is unexpected and therefore potentially important. Every additional word you speak in a professional context is actively diminishing the neurological impact of your message. You're literally teaching others to ignore you. A 2023 study analyzed communication patterns of 847 C-suite executives across 31 countries. Leaders rated as highly influential spoke an average of 62% less in meetings than their peers. More striking, the highest-rated leaders asked 340% more questions than they made statements. Let's talk about meetings specifically, because here's a number that should transform how you approach every professional meeting: 73%. That's the percentage of meeting time research identified as value neutral or value negative. Time spent on content that neither advances decisions nor improves outcomes. Nearly 3/4 of every meeting is, by empirical measurement, waste. But here's the opportunity. The professionals who learn to operate in the remaining 27% become disproportionately influential. Research reveals what's called the contribution paradox. Participants who speak the most in meetings are consistently rated as less influential than those who speak moderately. And those who speak moderately are rated as less influential than those who speak rarely but with precision. In a study of 2,300 meetings across 89 organizations, participants speaking in the top quartile of word count were rated as highly influential only 12% of the time. Participants in the bottom quartile of word count but top quartile of contribution quality were rated as highly influential 67% of the time. Speaking less but with greater precision makes you more than 5 times more likely to be perceived as influential. The book introduces the 3-sentence maximum. Before any meeting contribution, compress your point into 3 sentences or fewer. This forces you to identify what's actually essential. It requires stripping away qualification, context, and hedge language. For negotiations, here's what separates successful negotiators from unsuccessful ones. The best negotiators talk less than their counterparts. Research shows skilled negotiators spend roughly 40% of negotiation time listening actively, compared to 20% for average negotiators. They ask 3 times as many questions. They make significantly fewer statements. The mechanism is straightforward. Every word you speak in a negotiation reveals information about your priorities, constraints, and bottom line. Every question you ask extracts information from the other party. The negotiator who listens more accumulates information advantage, and information advantage translates directly to leverage. One of the most powerful negotiation techniques is intentional silence after the other party speaks. Most people find silence uncomfortable. After 3 or 4 seconds, anxiety rises. Anxious people talk. They fill the space. They reveal information they hadn't intended to share. They make concessions they hadn't planned to offer. A 2021 study tested this in controlled simulations. Negotiators trained in strategic silence achieved outcomes 17% more favorable than those who responded immediately. The only difference was the pause. Now here's my personal take on this material. And this is where I want to get real with you. I agree with almost everything in this book. The neuroscience is solid. The strategies are practical. The examples are compelling. But there's something the book doesn't address that I think is crucial. Strategic brevity can become its own form of performance. You can become so focused on saying less that you're not actually present in conversations anymore. You're calculating, strategizing, gaming every interaction. And here's the danger. People can sense this. They might not know exactly what's off, but they'll feel something inauthentic. So here's my addition to this framework. The goal isn't to speak less. The goal is to be so present, so genuinely engaged with what's actually happening, that unnecessary words naturally fall away. When you're truly listening, you don't need to fill silence because you're not afraid of it. When you're truly connected, you don't need to overexplain because you trust the relationship. When you're truly confident, you don't need to prove yourself through volume. The brevity should be a byproduct of presence, not a technique applied over anxiety. I'd also push back on one thing. The book sometimes implies that speaking less is universally better. But there are contexts where fuller expression serves connection. When a friend is grieving and just needs to hear your voice. When you're building rapport with someone new and shared stories create trust. When creativity requires verbal exploration and half-formed ideas spoken aloud. The real skill isn't always speaking less. It's knowing when to speak less and when to give more. So here's your action plan. 3 things you can start today. First, conduct a personal audit. For 1 week, notice your speaking patterns without trying to change them. How often do you speak to manage your own anxiety? How often do you fill silence because it's uncomfortable? Just observe. Second, implement the 3-second rule. Before any response, wait 3 full seconds. Not 1, not 2, 3 complete seconds. This feels uncomfortable at first. That discomfort is the point. You're rewiring neural pathways. Third, practice 1 conversation per week where your goal is to speak as little as possible while remaining fully engaged. Choose a patient partner. Explain what you're practicing. Then enter the conversation with single-minded focus. Listen completely, respond minimally, embrace every silence. I want to close with something the book says at the end, because it captured something important. The world doesn't need more noise. It doesn't need more content, more opinions, more explanations, more words. The world is drowning in words. What the world needs is someone who speaks only when it matters. Someone whose words carry weight because they aren't scattered carelessly. Someone who has mastered the profound discipline of strategic silence. The less you say, the more you matter. Here's my question for you, and I genuinely want to know. What's one situation in your life where you consistently over-explain? Where the words keep coming even though part of you knows they're diluting your message? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this kind of deep dive book analysis is valuable to you, subscribe. I'm committed to bringing you content that doesn't just summarize books but gives you genuine insight you can actually use. The silence after this video ends is yours now. Use it well.